Greetings adventurers, Frost here, and today I want to go over how to parse as a mage in BWL. And this is not going to be a short one because there's a lot to go over. So if you need to, go get a snack and a blanket and get cozy, and let's get into it. So we're going to go over what talents you want to use, what consumes you want to use, what world buffs you want to get, and how you're going to get your world buffs, like what order, different gear sets that you want to have prepared. And I have another video talking about those in more detail of like how to create gear sets, specific BIS lists for BWL and so on. Then we're going to go over the general strategy for each boss that you want to use, and then cooldown and trinket usage. That's very important. And then all-star boss priority, which is just basically how you scale or how you do parsing as a mage, because it's going to be a more week-to-week thing, because the single week parses are not that reliable as a mage and they're pretty RNG. And we'll talk more about the RNG of mage parsing and BWL in the conclusion. But other than that, let's move on to the talents. So the talent build that you're going to be running is a bit different than the one that you are running in Molten Core. And also we're just not going to do the Winter's Trail Mage because you're not really parsing as a Winter's Trail Mage, right? So your frost tree is the same. You're still getting full elemental precision because you're not hit capped yet. And you are still getting all the same other talents inside the frost tree. Now the arcane tree, you're changing it up a little bit. You are using arcane spells inside of BWL. So you're going to want to get 5 out of 5 arcane focus because you're still not going to have 6% hit from your gear because hit cap's 16%. If you do have a lot of BWL pieces, like full BIS is 5%. So really you're still going to be getting this talent until we have ZG gear. Okay, and then moving on, magic absorption is very good for BWL also because you want to have fire resistance for certain fights like Fire Maw and Veil, and it will just help your general survivability. And then the mana restore is a nice bonus because you will be resisting a lot of things on those fights because you are also running a lot of fire resistance. Then the standard arcane concentration. Improved arcane explosion is not as good for BWL, but it's still worth getting. You are sacrificing 3 points out of arcane mind to be able to get these, but BWL fights are pretty short and you don't really run into mana problems. If you are having mana problems, it's not a big deal to move these 3 points back into here because this is really only benefiting your damage for lab packs and for Nefarian for that parse because of the skeletons. Other than that, arcane explosion is not used that often inside BWL, and then the rest of the tree is the same. So then the next thing that I want to talk about is the Weakauras. So I have 4 Weakauras here. This first one shows the vulnerability on mobs like Chromaggus or the Draconoids before Chromaggus that are either vulnerable to fire or shadow or frost or arcane or a certain school of magic, right? And this, you can just put detect magic on it and it will tell you on your screen what vulnerability it is so you can know immediately instead of having to test it. And then the second one for boss abilities is just a Weakaura that will show you, it will pop up a little thing for the different boss abilities, basically. So like these things with the little like cooldown thing or counter when it's going to go off, etc. Progress circles. This is the same idea. It tells you like when you need to LOS for Chromaggus breaths and stuff like that, and it just has a little progress circle that ticks down so you know right when it's going to go off. And then a target bar. This will help your DPS a little bit. It's just a simple target bar that you can click on each of the different targets to target a skull, an X, a square, whatever. Okay, and then on to the consumable list. Now mages use a lot of consumes to parse. It is one of the more expensive classes to do a lot of DPS on, and that's because you have the only DPS flask, casters that is, and that's Flask of Supreme Power. So that's a big bonus to your damage. Obviously, if you're trying to get a good parse, you're going to want to use a flask. if you're not going for the 99 percentile, obviously, like this consume list, you don't need all of these, but if you do want to get and like compete for a very high parse, like top 10 or even like top 50, you're probably gonna have to use most of these consumes. You might be able to get a top 100 without them, if you do have like world buffs, for example. But let's get into the list. Flask, of course, greater arcane elixirs, and then also the number of these depends on your wipes, right? Like how many times you wipe, how long your run's gonna take, etc. Generally, the speed runs actually take less of each consume. It takes a lot of different consumes because you're using so many of them to do it fast, but you're not using multiple greater arcane elixirs, right? You clear the raid within an hour and you're not dying, so you're only using one. But yes, anyways, that aside, greater arcane elixirs, elixirs of frost power, elixirs of fire power, Valentine's chocolates, if you were smart enough to get a bunch. I did not get enough. I thought I had one more day to collect them when I was going to collect them, because I was waiting, because I was ranking at the time and I had hit cap, and I thought I would be able to get it the day of after me hitting capped, but it was gone that night. So rip me on that. I used my last one on our last speed run. Then food buff, Run Tum Tuber Surprise. That is just 10 ints, just a food buff, very cheap, easy to get. Elixir of Fortitude, 120 health. If you're dead, you are not doing damage, that means you lost your world buffs. Yeah, so health also helps. Rumsy Rum, same thing, 15 stam there. Grog is a slightly worse version. What is it, like 120 health, 12 stam or something like that, but almost as good from Dire Maul, and it's cheaper. Raptor Punch, you lose some stam but gain some int, so you should have enough stam, especially made up from these, so that you can lose a little bit of stam there to gain some damage. Cerebral Cortex Compound, Blasted lands 25 stamina, or sorry, 25 intellect. Nice little buff, basically half a crit, right? Juju Ember, this is echoes inside of Winter Spring from killing bears. It only takes 3 of the echoes to get 3 Juju Embers, and it's 15 fire resistance for 10 minutes, so you only need a few of them if you're doing a speedrun, and they're very nice for Veil and Fire Moss specifically. Then another thing, Magic Resistance Potion, same thing, 50 fire resistance. I don't think it stacks with Gift of the Wild, but it is still more magic resist, so it's still worth it for Veil and Fire Maw. And then Alterac Mana Biscuits, these are better than Mage Food and Mage Water. They give you back more mana, and they give you back more health than Mage Food and Water, so everyone in your raid should be getting these instead of having your mages make water, because it is faster. Dark and then Demonic Runes, whichever one, if you want to buy them, if you want to farm them, you're going to need a few of those because you're not always going to have a mana gem made. Then Greater Fire Protection Potions, you're going to need a lot of these ones. These ones, I basically always have a GFPP up. If my shield falls off, I pop a new one. I always want to have it up, and I just get it on cooldown basically whenever I can, because like you end up using only like 9 to maybe like 12 per run if you're doing a speed run and you're not dying. So it's really not all that bad. It is a lot, but it's your most expensive consume outside of the flask, I would say. And then Greater Nature Protection Potion, you want one for Chromaggus. Greater Shadow Protection Potion, you want one for Nefarian. Hourglass Sand, you want some of these for Chromaggus in case your raid can't loot enough, because if you do want to do a lot of damage, well, you are not prioritized for an Hourglass Sand as a DPS, so if you want to get rid of that stun so you can actually cast, well, may want to bring some of your own Hourglass Sand. You can buy it off the auction house. Next, Elixir of Poison Resistance or Anti-Venom. Anti-Venom does have a minute cooldown, so you want to bring both, but it is cheaper, so you could use that and then Elixir of Poison Resistance after. But this is for Chromaggus. He puts a poison on you, the green debuff, and you can just remove that instantly with one of these consumables right here, and they are not that expensive. Like Elixir of Poison Resistance are like 1 gold, so it's really not that bad, and they're easy to farm from low level spiders. Then bandages, there's going to be times where you're bandaging yourself inside the raid, have some bandages on you. Major mana potions, popping those a lot of the times instead of drinking, if like in suppression room and stuff like that, or on boss fights, of course. You want to keep your mana up and keep the drink time to the minimal amount if you're doing a speed run. Major healing potion, of course. Limited invulnerability potion, this is good for both keeping you alive if you pull aggro, specifically like Nefarian ads, you'll probably pull aggro on those. You may need to pop a lip there. Another play time would be Veil. If you get burning adrenaline at the end of the fight, you may be doing more threat than your tank, and you may have to not DPS because of that. But if the boss is going to die in 6 seconds, you can pop a limited invulnerability potion and just spam damage and get above his threat. As long as the boss dies before your lip falls off, you won't pull aggro. It's essentially a bop. You can't have aggro while you have it on you, but you still gain aggro while you have the lip on. So that can be a way to get some extra damage in on Veil. Then Oil of Immolation, you can use these while you are doing any AoE like lab packs or Nefarian ads, and it's not on a cooldown with anything else, so you can basically just have one up all the time whenever you're around a mob that will take fire damage. Then Goblin Sapper charges, you'll be using those on a lot of trash, and whenever there's like an AoE time that is not a undead. And I say that because Stratholme Holy Water actually scales with spell power, so Stratholme Holy Water will have a higher average than a Sapper charge, even though Sapper charges can crit and Holy Water can't. They do share a cooldown, so you can't use both, but so it's worth it to use on undead. But Stratholme Holy Water has a smaller radius, so if you can't hit as many mobs because the radius, then it's still worth it to use a Sapper charge. So you kind of have to pick your poison on that one. And then Dense Dynamite, if you need to, you can actually squeeze it inside of your global cooldown between your arcane explosions, so you can get extra DPS out of it if your Sapper charge is on cooldown and you want to use a Dense Dynamite to get some extra damage there for AoE on non-undead mob, because then you can't use Holy Water. Resto Potion, you use that on Chromaggus. That will cleanse your like diseases and magic effects and poisons every 5 seconds, so that will reduce the strain on your healers. You can use that for the second half, like the last 30 seconds of Chromaggus is ideal to use a Resto Pot on. And then Whipper Root Tubers, you're not always going to have a Hellstone, so you want to have a Whipper Root Tuber just in case, because again, staying alive, keeping your world buffs, keeping your consumes is the top priority. Then next we have our world buffs. So there's a lot of different world buffs you have to get. This is only going to grow as the phase goes on, but for now we have 8 world buffs that we need as a mage. So the way I do it is I start out by going to Dire Maul, and I will get these 2. I don't get the attack power one unless I'm doing MC, then I'll get it just for the extra debuff, so I don't get it dispelled on Gar or something, maybe, I don't know. But other than that, I just really grab these. Those are the main 2 that we need as a caster. Then next I will go to Darkmoon Faire, and that's because I don't mind going back and getting Dire Maul. Those are very easy to go back and get in case I do lose my buffs going to Darkmoon Faire. Then after Darkmoon Faire, I actually go to BFD, despite it being a 1 hour buff, but I don't like prioritizing this one over my later buffs. So I just get it early, and I just try and get the rest of my buffs efficiently so I don't lose much time on it. So then after I get BFD buffed, then I will go back to Org and I will get my Onyxia buff or Nef Head, whichever one, same thing, and then War Chief's Blessing also. And after I get those 2, I get summoned out to get a Songflower, and then after I get my Songflower, I will get summoned to Ubers, and I will get an Ubers Fire Resistance buff, and this one's very, very big, especially if you're Veil and Fire Maw Parse, because it's going to give you 83 fire resistance. It's going to be a big difference maker that makes it so you can just wear your DPS gear, rather than having to wear a bunch of fire resistance gears so that you can stay in. Like we stay in, I wear like 1 or 2 pieces of fire resistance. I wear my Dragon Slayer Signet, so my Onyxia ring, and my T1 3 set, because I have the helmet and the gloves that have some fire resistance on there. Other than that, I don't change any of my gear for those fights, so I still do almost the same amount of damage that I would do without. And then also the magic resistance potion that we were talking about earlier, and we'll get into the specifics of how I do those fights later. So next we have gear sets. So I have 4 different gear sets that I use. The first one is a single target frost spell power set. You'll be using this set on Razor Gore, Broodlord, Ebon Rock, Flame Gore, and Nefarian. those are all single target fights where you're only using Frostbolt. So on all those fights, you'll be using that set. Then your single target flat spell power set, so there's no frost spell damage like your AV offhand, or like Cold Snap if you have that, or Ringo's Boots if you have those. So you'll be using this for Chromaggus and the Draconids, and that's because those mobs have the elemental vulnerabilities, so you'll also be casting fire spells and arcane spells, so you want to have the full spell power for those spells as well. Then the next set is a single target frost spell power set with fire resistance. So it just has a few extra fire resistance pieces, but that set does keep in mind that you're getting the Uber's buff, because that is a very strong gold buff to get, and it's literally right next to the BWL entrance. It's very easy to get. You just have to mind control the Spellbinder inside of Ubers. And you'll be using that set for Veil of Straws and Fire Maw. And then the last set is an AoE set. You'll be using that for Lab Packs, Suppression Room, and the trash right after Veil inside the room upstairs. And then if you want to have more information about these sets, I have another video. I'll leave a link in the description to all these sets and to the presentation, of course, and everything down below. So if you want to go watch that video and see more about how I build my sets and where my stats are prioritized and all that, then you can go check that out. Now let's get into the strategies for each boss. So for Razor Gore, the parse for Warcraft logs does not start recording until Razor Gore is actually spawned. So only your damage onto Razor Gore. None of the ads that are spawning before count. So you want to save your cooldowns for the boss, obviously, and then you want you can also like drink during the ads and stuff. So like it's really killing the ads is not a big deal as long as you're popping the eggs as fast as possible if you're trying to like do a speed run or whatever. But it's pretty chill time. And then also another thing that you can do is you can actually amp magic Razor Gore. So he takes like an extra, I think it's like 70 magic damage or 75 magic damage while he's being mind controlled because he's a friendly unit. So that's another way to get some extra damage on Razor Gore. Also note it's the shortest fight in the raid. He has a very small health pool. So like for example, we kill Razor Gore in about 17 seconds. So that gives me only about 15 seconds of actually hitting him because the fight starts while Razor Gore is being pulled over, right? So and then you're starting to cast. You're not getting much time actually on him. You're getting basically one arcane power. So you want to keep that in mind, that you're not going to be able to use power infusion or a whole power infusion depending on how fast you kill him. Maybe you can use power infusion and AP if your guild's killing him pretty slowly. It just all depends. You have to go back and check your logs and plan that all out. But also, you're not going to be able to use your cooldowns on both Razor Gore and Veil, because Veil has like one trash pack before Veil, right? So you're going to be killing Razor Gore, bam, you're on Veil. So if you want to get a good parse on Veil, you're going to have to not use your cooldowns on Razor Gore, or if you want a good cooldown parse on Razor Gore, you're going to have to use at least some of them. Like, for example, I use AP on Razor Gore, I use AP and MQG on Razor Gore, and then I will use TOEP and PI on Veil of Straws. It would be better to be able to use both AP and PI on Veil, but I need a better Razor Gore parse, and we'll get into that of specifically like which parse do I need a better parse on later, and that's how you increase your all-stars for parsing. So, but Razor Gore is pretty simple, just frostbolt them and use your cooldowns depending on how long the fight is, and we'll talk about what trinkets and what cooldowns you want to use depending on how long the fight is later. So next, Veil of Straws. This is a little bit more of a complex fight. You're going to be wanting to use fire resistance, as we said earlier, because there's a knockback. There's an AoE pulse that knocks your cast back. So you're going to be wanting to use a little bit of extra fire resistance, and that Uber's buff will help out with that a lot. Now, this is the second fastest fight in the raid because of the extra damage, especially melee are doing inside of this fight. Rogues have unlimited energy. Warriors have unlimited rage. Mages have unlimited mana. Not exactly the best bonus, but the burning adrenaline is insane for mages because it makes your casts instant. So you have instant cast frostbolts and you do 100% extra damage. But before we get into that, let's talk about what we need to do before the fight starts. So you want to have a GFPP pre-popped so that you have that extra fire shield, and then you have your potion off cooldown. And then 2 minutes before the fight, you want to try and pop a magic resistance potion. So this is probably popping it somewhere on Razor Gore, or like right before Razor Gore spawns, so that your potion's coming back off cooldown for Veil. And then during Veil, if you're right before, or actually before I get into that, right before Veil pulls, you want to pop a Fire Ward so you have an extra shield. And then when your GFPP falls off mid-fight, you can pop another GFPP. And the reason you really want these shields is because these shields will prevent knockback, right? So the more shields you have, then the less you're going to get knocked back inside this fight. And the knockback is going to make it so even if you don't get Burning Adrenaline, you can still get a good Parse if you're not getting knocked back much on Veil, but you're not going to get like a top Parse unless you get Burning Adrenaline, obviously, because those instant casts and extra 100% extra damage, it makes a big difference. No one really kills Veil faster than like 25 seconds. So as of right now, you're still wanting to use both AP and PI to get the best Parse. So you can't use either on Razor Gore. But like I said, I just use PI because we have like a 30-second Veil. It works out. It's good enough. If I can get a good Razor Gore Parse and stop getting unlucky, then I could use both on Veil, for example. But then also keep note for Veil, MQG is not exactly the best trinket if you're trying to get like a top Parse on Veil, and that's because Burning Adrenaline makes your casts instant. So MQG would be basically a useless trinket slot if you did get Burning Adrenaline. So it's actually best to use Tear and Toe-Up, I believe, for Veil, because then you can pop Toe-Up with your Burning Adrenaline, get that extra damage, and you have Tear, you're getting extra spell power there, and then hit, would just be insane damage, right? But that's assuming Burning Adrenaline. You will do more damage without getting Burning Adrenaline with Tear and MQG. Now, if you get Burning Adrenaline, it's going to kill you, right? However, there's a way to avoid that and keep your world buffs, and that is by hearthing, and your hearth is going to be instant because all your casts are instant, right? So as long as your raid can kill Veil before Burning Adrenaline kills you, you can kill Veil, use your hearth, and then /camp, you'll instantly log out, your debuff will tick away, and also it won't even blow up because there's like an anti-grief mechanism so that people couldn't like blow up the inns because they like didn't want people doing that in Classic. But anyways, you can save your buffs like that, get summoned back, and keep doing the run with your world buffs after getting Burning Adrenaline. Then we have Broodlord. So for Broodlord, pretty simple fight for mages. You can outrange a blast wave, so you're just going to blink away to where the range you're going to be standing and start casting Frostbolt. Now this fight is very close to Fire Maw. There's only like 1 or 2 trash packs, and you can actually just pull Fire Maw immediately after Broodlord, depending on Fire Maw's pathing. So again, you're gonna have to plan accordingly, whether you want to use AP, PI on Broodlord, on Fire Maw, your trinkets on Broodlord or Fire Maw, whatever, so on. Now, another thing to note for Broodlord is that he's not immune to fire, so at the end of the fight, if there's no time for you to get in one last Frostbolt, you can run in and get a Fire Blast in for a little bit of extra damage there. You don't really need any protection potions for Broodlord. I do pre-pop my fire potions on Broodlord so that I have my potion cooldown again on Fire Maw. And that way I can use a magic resistance potion, which we're going to be talking about that. It's the same thing as Veil. You want a GFPP pre-popped. You want to hit a magic resistance potion, ideally 2 minutes before the fight because it lasts 3 minutes. And then you'll have your potion cooldown back up, and then you can pop a second GFPP mid-fight. You're using a Fire Ward again right before the fight starts, and you're also using your fire resistance set again. Now, last time I did Fire Maw, I did not have to move out. We all stayed in. Every single one of our DPS stayed in for the entire thing. We also pre-planned this, that we were going to use a little bit of extra DPS gear rather than actually going full fire resistance, so that we can kill Fire Maw faster, so that we don't get as many stacks, right? So that's you have to go for a balance between the two. And obviously the Uber's buffs helps a ton for Fire Maw. Now, other than that, Be careful of pulling threat if you're not having to hide, because if your tanks are swapping aggro on Fire Maw, it can be sketch and you can over aggro if you are just casting the entire time going ham. So do watch your threat meter. Next up, Ebonrock. Extremely simple boss for mages. Stay at a range, cast Frostbolt, don't over aggro. Now, Ebonrock and Flamegore are literally right next to each other. You kill Ebonrock, then you kill Flamegore. No trash in between, right next to each other. So this is the epitome of having to choose which cooldowns you want to use. Do you want to use it on Ebonrock, or do you want to use them on Flamegore? Your pick. Same exact boss fight for mages also. No difference for us. There's differences for the tanks and the healers, but for mages, you're just DPSing at a range. Don't pull aggro. Pick which cooldowns you want to use for that boss fight. Very simple. Chromag. So, Chromag, you want to have a pre-popped nature protection potion. Also, you're going to want to have the elemental vulnerability Weakauras that I mentioned earlier. Very important. Now, you're also going to have to be very careful on threat on Chromaggus, because you can get 8k Frostbolt crits, like 9k Fireball crits. Your Arcane Missiles crit for like 1500 or something like that, like ridiculous amounts, right? So if you're getting a lot of Frost, Fire, and Arcane resistances and you're just pumping into Chromag, you will out aggro your tank. So you have to watch your threat here on this fight. But other than that, going into your cooldowns, obviously you want to use your cooldowns during the correct vulnerability phases. It's ideal to use it during Frost. Fire is the second most ideal, and Arcane is the worst to use them on, but it's better to use it on Arcane than to use it on a Nature or a Shadow, right? If like the boss is going to die, for example. Now, keep in mind you can only use Palm on Frost or Fire, because there's no castable Arcane spell that does damage. Other than that, LOS the breast at the last second, and then also use consumes to remove debuffs. So if you get the poison debuff, use an elixir, poison resistance, or use an anti-venom. Use a resto pot for the last 30 seconds of the fight. That will just passively dispel your buffs. And then Hourglass Sand, use that if you get the bronze debuff. And that will help you be able to just not be CC'd for the fight, take less damage, stay alive, and it'll make the fight a lot and MQG are on cooldown, then you're going to be using Briarwood Reed along with Tear. And then for AoE fights, you want to use Toep and Eye of the Beast. And sometimes instead of Eye of the Beast, you'll also be using Tear. That just depends on the fight. Like some fights also have single target in them, like Gar, where you're single targeting, and then at the end of the fight, you're AoEing down the ads. It depends on your strategy, but you want to take that into account. And I go into more about the AoE sets versus single target sets and how to set those all up inside of the video that I talk about gearing. Now, if you don't have Tear, and then you want to use both MQG and Toep when the fight is between 30 and 80 seconds long. Now, this is because if it's under 30, then you're going to basically have MQG up the whole time, and you're barely going to use any of your Toep because you cannot pop them both at the same time, right? So it has to be over that length for it to be worth it to use Toep over a Briarwood Reed, for example, because the Briarwood Reed would increase your damage during your MQG. Now, if the fight's longer than 80 seconds, then it becomes worth it to use the Reed because your Toep is only up for so long, and then the Reed's also increasing your damage during MQG. So despite the fight, like I know before we would use Toep over Reed no matter how long the fight was, but when you're considering MQG damage being affected by Briarwood Reed, it makes the Toep not as good once the fight becomes over a certain length. However, if the fight becomes over 2 minutes where you can use the Toep twice, then it becomes maybe better to bring the Toep back in instead of the Reed. So yeah, it's still a little bit undecided and there's not quite enough testing, but that's what I am doing because I do not have Tear. So that's how I'm doing it, is 30 to 80 seconds. Over 2 minutes, I'll use Toep again. None of our fights are over 2 minutes anymore, but that is how I do it. And then also to maximize MQG, you use it when there is a to maximize MQG, you want to use it when there's 5 seconds left on PI, right? And that's because MQG lasts 20 seconds and Arcane Power only lasts 15. So you obviously want to have MQG up at the same time as AP, but then you also want PI to be up for your other 5 seconds of MQG. So for the last 5 seconds of PI, you pop your MQG, and then right when PI falls off, pop your AP, and then you're good to go. Then also if you're using Toep and MQG, then you use Toep right when PI gets casted on you, and that's because Toep lasts 15 seconds, PI lasts 20. So when Toep falls off, 5 seconds left on PI, you can use your MQG, and that's that 5 second lineup so that you have MQG up for all of the AP again. Once it's a little bit weird, like getting used to it, but once you get used to it, it's pretty easy to get down. It's mainly just on your priest for getting those PIs off right when you need them. And the more runs you do with your priest, then the better your priest will be at timing those PIs correctly for when you want them. Now, All-Star boss priority. All-Stars is an interesting thing that you have to consider for Warcraft logs, especially as a mage, because the single target, so like warriors a lot of the time will use the single raid, like the damage on bosses for that one raid, right, as like their determiner. But for BWL specifically, that's an extremely RNG way to measure your DPS as a mage. So I think the All-Stars is better. And it's RNG because you're going to need to get, like if a mage gets Burning Adrenaline on Veil, rolls a good Chromag vulnerability, and doesn't get Mage class call and gets a Warlock class call on Nefarian, well, their parse for that one run is going to be absolutely insane just based on the fact that they rolled the perfect RNG for every single boss fight, right? It's not based on the fact that they actually did well. Like you have to roll good RNG on all the fights, whereas All-Stars, yes, you still have to roll RNG, but you can go back 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 7, 8 weeks in a row and try and get the good RNG on Veil. Try again, and it just decreases that RNG factor because you're getting more attempts at it, so you get a better chance at getting it each week, and then you can focus on those each week. Now, when I say prioritizing which boss you want to like do a good parse on that week for All-Stars, you want to go and look at your All-Star page. Like this is my All-Star page here. So for example, I need a better Razorgore parse and a better Veil parse. So that sucks, obviously. You can't use the cooldowns on both. So, but we talked about that earlier, how I do it. I use AP and MQG on Razorgore, and I just keep getting a lot of resists on Razorgore, so I just can't get a good parse on Razorgore. But eventually, once I get a good parse on Razorgore, then I can stop using AP and MQG on Razorgore, and I can use them on Veil. I'll probably keep using MQG on Razorgore, however, I'll probably use it once on Veil just to try and get like a good baseline parse without burning adrenaline, because it is kind of RNG to get burning adrenaline, right? So you can't really rely on that, but if you do get it, then you're just going to get in like top 100 rank easy, right? Probably top 50, even higher than that easy, probably. Just depends. Then Broodlord, the simple one, or well, sorry, I don't know why I was going down in the order. The other ones that I need are Chromag, right? Like, so that's just like waiting for good RNG on Chromag. And same thing with Nefarian. My last one, I fucked up my AoE. We got some decent RNG. We've still gotten 5 out of 5 mage class calls, but the last one, the mage class call didn't really fuck us up that much. However, I fucked up my AoE, so that's how it goes sometimes. But then, like, for example, Flamegore, not many mages have done a very good parse on, and the way I got my 100 parse on there was by not using my cooldowns on Ebon Rock and saving them for Flamegore, right? So you doing stuff like that can really boost your all-stars ranking. So you just want to come through here and look which ones you want to improve your rank on, because this rank directly correlates to your all-star points, which correlates to how high you're ranked, right? So you want to plan your cooldowns and your trinkets before you do the run for which bosses you want to use them on, etc. And you can also look at like how long your guild generally takes on trash before bosses. Maybe you will have time to like get an MQG up between Flamegore and Chromag. Maybe you won't. Like I don't have time between Flamegore and Chromag, right? So now I can save my MQG for Chromag. So it just all depends. You just have to pre-plan that out. Now, as a conclusion, we've already kind of talked about this, but overall, just keep in mind mage parsing in BWL is very RNG heavy, and it has to do with resists, crits, burning adrenaline on Veil, elemental vulnerabilities on Chromaggus, and class calls on Nef. There's just shit all over the dungeon of RNG. It sucks, but we got to deal with it. It is also heavily dependent on your cooldown and trinket usage, and that's where you can actually bring in your planning to increase your parses. So preparing and using your gear properly, preparing and using your gear sets properly also does that. So having the correct gear that's actually going to do the most damage, right? Like if you have world buffs, spell power is generally better than crit. Like instead of being like 10 spell power per 1% crit, it's like 7 spell power per 1% crit. Right, so you have to keep those all into account. Then it's also heavily reliant on your world buffs, your consumes, and also how fast your raid kills the bosses. Because if your raid kills the bosses faster, then a higher percentage of the boss kill time is during your cooldowns. So that also heavily changes how much DPS you do for the parse, right? So that's it for how I parse in BWL. And I know it was a very long one, so thank you to those of you that stuck it out for this entire video, and good luck out there, mages. Thank you all so much for watching. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I really appreciate the support. And as always, I'll see you all in Azeroth.